we see very much in the same rubric again that there is a very vibrant private sector which has learned the tricks and trades of making profit. But you see cartelization, and the manifestations of that you see out on the streets with shortages of power and electricity and many other consumer items. You see that there's a very concerted move to subvert the Competition Commission ordinance and the institutional frameworks. So there's a huge non-bona fide private sector lobby out there working extremely collaboratively. A classical example of how social capital can be harnessed, but it's not working in the interest of the state and the people. And I could continue to go on with examples, but perhaps since I come from the health sector, one thing that I feel very passionate about is the observation of harnessing social capital in an extremely adverse note in the health and education sectors. So you see that public services are under-resourced and that the private sector works extremely effectively the public-private collusion works very effectively to ensure that resources are pilfered from the system, that there's a huge amount of procurement graft, that there are thriving private practices, that there are services charged for public services that are meant to be provided for free, that there is no effective regulation of the health and education sectors. And in my recent book that the anchor person very kindly referred to, it is the institutionalization of these malpractices that I referred to with some level of detail. And again, this shows that social capital has been harnessed very effectively, but it serves individual interest. It does not serve the broader national goals. It does not serve the welfare. It does not serve the equitable outcomes that it should indeed aim to impact. The fourth point that I'd like to raise with reference to social capital is again a question. Are we harnessing social capital within the rubric of the social services itself? And I think again the answer is a big no. We see a lot of fragmentation in the social services. So there are NGOs that are working in community development. There are donor agencies that sing to the gender empowerment mantra. There are quasi-business groups which invest in vocational training and skill enhancement. But these things cannot come to fruition because the state apparatus, as the chairman said earlier, is not there and is not geared towards learning lessons and then deploying them and scaling them up in a manner which would bring welfare to the people. We know from lessons in the developed world that quantum changes in the lives of the people are made possible when there is sustainable growth and where there are some structural transformations which enable a set of economic freedoms for people more equitably in terms of giving them access to resources, in terms of ensuring their land rights, in terms of having an honest redistributive hand which guards against vested commercial interests. And in such environment where governments learn to be strategic with their social services, even when governments are not well resourced as ours, but when they are committed to having a very clear definition, where they're committed to providing equity in social service frameworks, that it is then that the little initiatives that are rolled out by different sectors, whether they're in the microfinance sector, whether they relate to gender empowerment, whether they're in the labor market, whether they relate to skill enhancement, are effectively deployed, are effectively scaled up and contribute to national goals. And again, with reference to the social capital that can be enhanced, we are way back in terms of making a dent here. The fifth point that I'd like to make, and again, an elaboration of this relates to the realities of globalization. We as a country, as indeed many other developing countries, have been falling back in our performance, in our overall governance performance, in several of the streams that I've alluded to earlier. And on top of that, the world is changing very fast. We're finding it extremely difficult to keep up with its pace. In today's world, trade, commerce, services, finance, everything is interconnected. In today's world, multinational corporations, bilateral and multilateral agencies have a huge influence on public policy decisions in developing countries. In today's world, the constraints that are going to be imposed on access to technology, on an access to services by the intellectual property regime is going to create impediments of a scale that we do not even recognize. And then on top of that, in today's world, we in the country of Pakistan are faced with a very specific and unique foreign policy challenge. The world is not unipolar anymore. There are two countries emerging that are challenging the unipolarity of the world. Interestingly, both the countries, one of the countries is our friend and the other one sadly a foe. Both of them are in our immediate neighborhood, and with both we share common territory. Pakistan needs to be very strategic. It has to harness its social capital to learn to live in the new world order. And finally, I would like to talk about the role of diaspora. Dr. Athiya made an excellent presentation in the morning session, and if you look at the foreign remittance statistics in Pakistan, you will see that there have been years in which the amount of foreign direct investments to the country has actually been a lot more than the amount of official development assistance that the country has received. And yet, we see a great disparity. We see that the country is extremely preoccupied by facilitating and creating institutional arrangements for the multilateral and bilateral agencies, and actually conforming public policies and state policies and implementation arrangements in conformity with their stipulations. But there's very little that I know of that facilitates a remitter from abroad. There could be financial instruments created. There could be so many incentives and tax breaks given to people who remit from abroad, but there are certainly several gaps in that area. Our diaspora abroad not only can bring value back to the country in monetary terms, they can bring in technical resource, they can bring in investments, they network with different communities. But unfortunately, the facilitation, the harnessing of their strengths through public policy interventions is an area where we really need to make very significant strides in order to harness their potential. So to summarize, I would like to say that social capital is a term which has had a very restricted use. We in the development world talk about social capital in a very narrow sense in terms of how it relates to community development. There is a broader remit of social capital which relates to how institutions develop, that relates to how governance improves, and that relates to how that impact the equity within populations and peace and prosperity at a national level more broadly. And we need to learn to harness that. Normally, it is the role of leadership to bring this transformational change. But again, I'd like to end on a quote from the chairman of the previous session, that there are two kinds of changes that you bring. There's one which is proactive. We do not see that coming. But there's another one that is more reactive. And in the case of Pakistan, particularly within the context of what has been happening recently, that will be the model. Organizations such as yourself that help to catalyze change and that help to bring that momentum play a very important role. And I'd like to end again by commending you for the value that you bring. Thank you.